Kwarteng's sacking means he suffers the indignity of being the second shortest serving chancellor in history. He lasted only 38 days. There is only one chancellor who had a shorter tenure, and he died in office. You also notice that 3 of the 5 shortest serving chancellors served under the Tories since 2019. And that's a sign of how unstable British politics has become. A fact circulating on Twitter today was that in the 19 years from 1997 to 2016, all of 5 people served as Prime Minister or Chancellor. So they were Tony Blair, Gordon Brown, Alistair Darling, David Cameron and George Osborne. So 5 in 19 years. In the 6 years since, we've already had 3 Prime Ministers and 6 Chancellors. Aaron, in a way, this is a sign of the incompetence that reigns within the Conservative Party. But I think on a broader level, this is about the instability of politics. People are saying since Brexit, you can have all sorts of explanations as to why it's happening. But what do you think is going on here? Why is British politics so much more unstable than it has ever been? And will it be stable again?
I don't think it will get particularly stable very soon, no, because the fundamentals of the British economy over the last 30 years, 40 years really, are in free fall. We've lost North Sea oil, so we're now a net energy importer. That has huge consequences for our balance of trade payments, for the fact whether or not we can heat our own homes, for people's bills potentially. If you want to bring it in public ownership, a left government would have wanted to do that. Of course, you can't do that now. We could have had a wealth fund like Norway, National Sovereign Wealth Fund. Not being a net exporter of energy, I think departing the European Union, Michael, is so enormous. Because what's interesting is I think basically from the early 1980s all the way through to today, you had a cast of politicians in this country who didn't really think about immigration policy. And I mean the actual policy, right? I don't mean being racist, right? I mean the actual nuts and bolts of how an independent nation state administers an immigration policy within international parameters, international treaties. Same on trade policy, same on industrial policy, same on energy policy. I think so much outsourcing was done to the European Union when we were members of the European Union. And I think, interestingly, that's exposed a lot of politicians as being fundamentally incapable of administering a nation state of 65 million people in the middle of a crisis outside the European Union without that safety net, without outsourcing thinking on the big questions. You might not like some of the thinking and some of the conclusions that came back from the European Commission and the European Parliament, but it was there. And there was standardization. You can imitate best practice from, 26, 27 other member states. That's gone. So I think purely by virtue of the fundamentals, low growth, energy importer, global kind of trends here, we're not going to see inflation staying low for a long time. Why? Because really from 1990, we were importing low inflation from China. The Chinese working class were making things incredibly cheaply, and they were exporting low inflation to the rest of the world. Amazing speech, Michael, this week, given by Josep Borrell, Vice President of the European Commission. He said that the Chinese working class over the last 30 years have done more to keep inflation low than all the world's central banks put together. Remarkable statement. Remarkable statement. It would have been remarkable 2 years ago for an academic to say it. Now it's somebody at the pinnacle of power at the European Commission. So I think all those variables put together, plus Britain not being in the European Union, plus having this useless political class, I think it's going to be a very turbulent period. Very turbulent. And I think if you suspect it'll be over purely because we'll have a Labour government in charge, I would reply, you ain't seen nothing yet. You ain't seen nothing yet. And as somebody who grew up in the 1990s, it really does put into sharp focus how quiet that period was, how calm politically that period was, how economically passive it was. Economists call it the Great Moderation because you had relatively high growth, very low inflation, low industrial action. This is in the US and in Europe and the United Kingdom. And you just basically had a Goldilocks period. That's gone. But again, the counter argument is maybe that was the aberration, and actually going back to something that looks like the 70s or the 30s or the 20s, or the 1840s. There are plenty of precedents for sustained political economic volatility of the kind we're presently kind of within. And so, no, this idea of going back to normal, I think, is a fundamental misnomer.